and welcome to the February 22nd, 2023 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And thank you again for joining us. And with that, I'll call this meeting to order, and I will turn it over to the manager to introduce the first topic.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm excited to be here talking about the Eugene Airport. We don't often get chances to do this and just learn about some of our facilities and services. And it also gives me a chance to give some special gratitude to Catherine and her team for running such an incredible operation through one of the most challenging times of all of our lives. And the fact that we have a thriving airport as we come out of a pandemic and even through it says a lot about her leadership and the team's leadership. And so I wanted to say thank you and kick it over to you for the presentation.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Appreciate that. And really the whole team have a huge role in that. And that was one of our goals coming out of that pandemic, is to accelerate out of it and become even better. And I think we achieved that. So Mayor Vennis and councilors, thank you so very much for your time today. I'm Catherine Stevens. I'm the airport director, and I'm very pleased today to present to you the Advanced Terminal Planning Study. I have just a few brief comments before turning over the presentation to our consultants from RS&H. So just a little bit to set the stage for you. The Advanced Terminal Planning Study is an extension of the Airport Development Plan, also known by the FAA terminology as the Airport Master Plan, which was adopted by this body in October of 2020. The Advanced Terminal Planning Study was launched with a goal of meeting the current and future demand for commercial air service through a framework of environmental sustainability and resiliency. So the completed study includes an updated aviation demand analysis based on current air service data, phasing options for a terminal expansion, and then a rough order of magnitude of costs. So just a little history. Originally constructed at its current location in 1964, the Eugene Airport Terminal underwent a major expansion in 1988 with two smaller expansions in 2009 and 2014. In September of 2021, the terminal reached full capacity with all ticket counters, all gates, all remain overnight parking spaces for aircraft in full utilization. Frankly, you don't ever really want to get to a time when your facility is at full capacity without having a plan forward. So that's where we're at now, is it's getting going on that plan forward. So as far as passenger demand history, where all of this came from 2009 to 2019, we experienced a 75% increase in passengers. Now in 2020, of course, passenger numbers dropped significantly, but we recovered very quickly. And by May of 2021, we were back to our 2019 passenger numbers. So that was pretty significant. We recovered far faster than we thought we were going to. So in 2022, we served nearly 1.6 million total passengers, 30% above year-end 2019. That's really significant. We were describing operating at kind of breakneck pace for that entire year. So some of the contributing factors to that, 3 new airlines were recruited and began service at Eugene in 2021. Expanded service along with a very successful Fly Local, Fly EUG marketing campaign. That all resulted in an unprecedented 10% improvement in passenger retention, with a significant increase in passengers choosing to utilize the Eugene Airport instead of driving to the Portland International Airport. So put that in context for you. I've been at the airport for 16 years. We've seen gains of partial percents over the years, but we've never been able to move the needle. In 2020, we gained 2% back from PDX, and in 2021, we gained another 8% back. So that's our local residents choosing to use their local airport, really significant, and all of those vehicles not driving on I-5 up to PDX. So in this advanced terminal study, I asked for a few extras, and I think our consultants thought I was a little funny for asking these at first, but it really, I think, contributed a great deal to the quality of this study. So number one, I wanted public involvement. We wanted to run this process like a mini master planning process. So we had a community advisory committee and a technical advisory committee, and all of our airline partners were involved in this study as well. We also wanted to really use intentionality to make sure that we could be a leader, especially as a small hub airport in the airport industry, emphasizing environmental sustainability and resiliency as we took on this project. And then we also wanted some future thinking, planning for sustainable aviation fuels in the future and planning for advanced air mobility. Really exciting things that seem very far out in the future, but they will be here before we know it. And so we wanted to acknowledge those in this study as well. So with that, I will turn it over to our consulting team from RSNH. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Catherine. So good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. My name is Mark Ip. I am the project manager and an aviation architect with RSNH. And we, along with Catherine and the airport, worked on developing this advanced terminal planning study. This study is one of the first steps in optimizing the safety and efficiency of the current facility. And we truly appreciate this opportunity to review the process and results with you. With me today to help walk through important aspects of this planning study are Ricky Scanlon, our environmental specialist, who will speak about sustainability business strategy, and Frank Gradden, our National Aviation Design Director, who will talk about the airport's potential next steps. Today's discussion will be a quick project overview. We'll talk about sustainability and engagement and look at recommendations that came from the study. This project was separated into 3 distinct steps. First, we did the terminal program validation, which looked at the conditioning of the existing building and then verified the aviation forecast and started development of the CAP 2.0 sustainability strategy. Next, we developed initial concepts illustrating how the terminal building might expand, and through coordination with stakeholders and the airport, we refined those concepts and developed cost models for each option. Finally, we assimilated all the comments to develop the recommendations that we included in the final report. One thing I'd like to draw your attention to is something that was included in every phase, and that's the development and integration of the sustainability business strategy.
Thanks, Mark. So the airport does recognize the role that they play in community sustainability. And like Catherine said, from the beginning of this project, we wanted the advanced planning study to be developed with sustainability at the top of mind. Our goal was to set the foundation for sustainability now in the advanced planning phase with the development of our sustainable business strategy to set the precedents for sustainability in future phases of the project. So what we did was we began by really reviewing and reflecting on the principles that were established in the Climate Action Plan, as well as the goals outlined in the Climate Recovery Ordinance, to really form the foundation of that sustainable business strategy and provide a path for which we can support the city's goals through this terminal project. In addition to the city's goals for sustainability, the FAA and the aviation industry also has their own set of net zero goals, which coincidentally were announced and set in the midst of this project. So we're hopeful that the terminal project can really be developed with all of these commitments in mind. We also recognize that the city has the Sustainable Buildings Policy to achieve LEED Silver certification. And I'm sure you're all aware that LEED is a framework for designing healthy and highly efficient green buildings. It is focused on things like energy reduction, materials management, waste management, and more. And we saw many opportunities to make sure that we were incorporating those principles into the project as well. One thing that we noticed, though, when we were digging through the CAP 2.0 is that there is an emphasis on other components of sustainability, like equity, greenhouse gas emission reductions, climate action. And while LEED is an effective tool for managing sustainable design of buildings, it does lack in some of those softer areas of sustainability. So to address those gaps, we did also propose in the study to integrate the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure's Envision rating system. Envision is very similar to LEED, except it does expand its look at sustainability to address those softer elements of sustainability to kind of take a more holistic look at it. Next slide. So we did recognize that there are a lot of considerations when it comes to sustainability that we wanted to make sure was encompassed into this project, from the CAP 2.0 actions to LEED to Envision. And so to really integrate all of these aspects of sustainability and organize our thoughts around this, we developed 3 guiding principles that effectively make up our sustainable business strategy. We use these guiding principles to really focus our discussions, provide solutions, and also evaluate alternatives for the terminal. Those three guiding principles, which you see here on the screen, quality of life, resource and environment, and climate and resilience, encompass the actions of the CAP 2.0 and those lead and envision focus areas. Next slide. So through this process, we utilize those guiding principles to identify a number of early sustainability strategies that we were able to incorporate into this planning process. For example, we did seek to optimize the building's orientation to take advantage of daylighting, which can reduce our energy consumption and our energy needs for the project. In addition, the project will incorporate an expanded concession space, which can provide opportunities for local businesses to develop storefronts and promote their business at the airport. In addition, we also proposed the building as proposed is seeking to utilize timber and steel for the structural elements, which have the potential to reduce embodied carbon of the building and also have a high rate of recycle and reuse as well. Next slide. So again, I just want to emphasize that this is still planning. There are still a lot of details that will need to be fleshed out in future phases of design. So in addition to the ideas and strategies that we proposed, there are several other examples of opportunities for more sustainability enhancements to be further vetted in future phases of design. We want to emphasize the fact again that this was focused on concepts and planning. So what you're seeing here is not an exhaustive list of what we can do or what the next phase can do. At this point, there really are no opportunities off the table that we want to make sure that we look at or that the future design team looks at as well. I think we'd also be remiss to not acknowledge the public testimony that was given a few weeks ago at the City Council meeting about the expanding use of solar at airports. And we think it's a great opportunity that should be explored further in design as well. We want to thank that community member specifically for their testimony and also encourage other community members in the future to provide their ideas and thoughts on how you can make this terminal something that is sustainable and something that the community can be proud of.
Another important thing that we tried to ensure was extensive public involvement throughout the process. The airport assembled these multifaceted stakeholder groups, including all of the airline partners, universities in the catchment area, and members of the Sustainability Commission, so that we could have as broad array of input as possible. We engaged with these groups through online surveys, interviews, and open meetings, and all to solicit feedback that we could then use to develop refinements and ultimately our recommendations. Now let's take a quick look at some of our results. As Catherine mentioned earlier, the increase in traffic is what's driving the need for all these improvements and expansions. As the number of employments increase and the size of aircraft increases, more and larger gate positions are needed at the existing Concourse A is not particularly well equipped to handle. More flights mean more aircraft parking overnight, and more passengers flowing through the airport means more seating space and more concessions to avoid overcrowding and long lines. To process these passengers, we'll also need more capacity at all the other areas of the airport, such as ticketing, bag claim, vehicle parking, and passenger screening. Multiple options were considered to mitigate these issues, leading towards this recommendation we're showing you today. The new Concourse C provides 8 new larger gates, along with a small charter terminal with convenient nearby overnight aircraft parking. At the existing building, improvements can be made to Concourse A to help relieve congestion and increase comfort, while the processing spaces for ticketing, outbound baggage, and bag claim can grow in their current locations. This shows the existing apron level and where all the different primary components are configured today. The black dashed line is the area of the recommended terminal modifications. So let's walk through some of these recommendations at the apron level. The largest change at the existing building really comes from the ticketing and outbound baggage expansion, and of course, the addition of Concourse C. This baggage expansion is important to increase the depth of the ticketing and queuing spaces, while the full inline baggage system improves efficiency, safety, and security for both passengers and ground service workers. The other significant new function here is the charter terminal, which allows college sports teams and charter flights to process passengers without commingling them with standard passengers. The charter terminal includes a small, separate ticketing, baggage screening, and baggage claim area on the apron level, and leaves a swing gate on the upper level that can be used by other airlines when a charter flight is not scheduled. Now on the upper level, Concourse C had its own concessions, restrooms, and departure lounges, and is designed to comfortably service large-sized aircraft. Meanwhile, Concourse A has been expanded to accommodate medium to large sized aircraft with some additional seating area. The walkway to Concourse C includes moving walkways and opportunities for artwork, airline clubs, and other amenities, as well as a new administration space. Now, as with all projects of this scale, there are costs associated with these improvements. A local cost estimating partner developed these rough order of magnitude costs for construction based on conceptual diagrams. Each area has a range that includes contingencies and escalation. So here's what we're currently looking at. Baggage claim expansion, 19 to 22 million. Concourse A improvements, 9 to 11 million. Ticketing expansion, 29 to 34 million. Outbound baggage and administration, 43 to 50 million. Charter terminal, 8 to 9 million. And Concourse C, 125 to 147 million. This results in a total program estimate of 232 to 272 million. It's important to note here that these estimates are at a very high level and taking into account many variables, including the construction price volatility. This might affect the final total. Another way to influence these final costs is to also phase the project over time. And with that, we'll take a quick look at the what's coming next.
So before we start to look at the architecture vision, I wanted to step back for a moment and talk about the design process. The next step will be where the airport and the city of Eugene would decide to move forward and start the design process. In order to do that, you would make a selection of a design team. And then that design team would use the advanced terminal study as the roadmap, basically, for developing the design that would be implemented and go into construction for you. So it is the foundation of moving forward. Next slide. Before the design team puts pencil to paper, a good deal of research and listening is going to take place. Part of that is to really source some inspiration for the design, as well as to have a better understanding of the sense of place that is Eugene. Next slide. A good design process should be collaborative, and it should include the community and stakeholders, hopefully in a variety of public engagement, much like has already been done. That will continue. And that type of engagement really works well when it both communicates to the public as well as receives and processes the feedback. Part of that design process really is about establishing a sense of place. What we want to do is in this new project that we're developing, we want to make sure that it reflects both the values and some of the aesthetics that are found in Eugene, as well as the larger community that the airport serves. As Ricky mentioned earlier, the design process should integrate strategies of sustainability and resilience. We already talked about some of them, but they could include everything from solar to daylighting, the reuse of renewable and locally sourced materials, and of course, high performance systems. Since we're looking at an airport expansion, there will be a series of construction going on, and it's really important to understand the operations of the airport in order to find out what is the best configuration, especially from a phasing point of view, because of course, the airport has to operate during all this construction. And part of the design process will also include a series of refinements, cost estimates, and value engineering. Next slide. So as part of the terminal study, we decided to take this a little farther, dream a little bit, and imagine what the architecture of this expansion could look like. Of course, it's going to offer great capability, increased capacity for the airport, but also gives us an opportunity to change the look and feel of the overall airport while still staying compatible with the existing architecture, because I think that there's a lot of good reasons to look at the existing architecture. It has a really unique feel to it. And so we want to make sure that whatever expansion we do is compatible with what's existing. Next slide. So I've got to tell you, speaking as an architect, the design process is really one of the most satisfying parts of creating something new. I think as you take the next step into the design process, you're going to embark on a really fun and exciting journey. It really is once in a lifetime opportunity for many folks involved with this, and every one of you will be participants in that design process. And as a result of that, every one of you will have an opportunity to leave a legacy for your community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And I will turn it back to you for any questions you may have.
Hey, thank you so much. I just have to say that we all have, I really enjoyed reading this plan and this packet. It was really inspiring and very exciting. The sustainability elements were terrific. And I know that counselors have a lot of questions. So I've got Alan and then Randy and someone else raise a hand. Okay, Alan and Randy, take it away.
Thanks. This represents a lot of work. The charrette pictures is a good example of that. A lot of thought went into this and a lot of different options weighed. In my former job, I used to travel quite a bit and use the airport, and it always worked extremely well. Good job, Catherine, and your team. And I can confirm the capacity constraints this airport has for a very long time. I did want to compliment you on the sustainability that you've incorporated into this, and maybe and incorporating the CRO and CAP 2.0 and the CIP and the best management practices, especially around sustainability. Maybe you could remind us of some of the recent awards that you guys have gotten in that regard.
Sure. We've I don't know if it's awards, but we participated in a lot of different industry studies. So one involved a pilot study at our airport for greenhouse gas emission reduction. We are also working with the Airport Cooperative Research Program through the National Academies of Science to take a look at how local passengers utilizing their local airport instead of driving to a large hub is a lower greenhouse gas emissions footprint. And so that's something that obviously we've been working on over the years, is to get our local passengers to stay local, and we're having some great success there. So really all of the projects that we've been working on is kind of constant projects going on. Our rental car facility right now that's under construction. Also, our fixed space operator just built a new fuel farm that adds capacity for emergency response, but then also to serve these additional flights. Actually, the additional capacity is what I should say. Our operations are actually lower, but our seat capacity is higher. So all of those projects, we take that same framework from environmental sustainability and making the best decisions we can.
Good, thanks. Speaking of that, have you guys done a greenhouse gas reduction analysis on the elimination of people going to Portland and figured out how that impacts overall greenhouse gases, and including a lot of people don't take the whole picture into consideration of how that actually works. They just focus on one little thing. So, people fly to Portland instead of drive. Have you done that analysis yet?
So that's not our expertise, but I have certainly looked at a couple of different studies, and I shared some of those with you in the AIS. But that Airport Cooperative Research Program study is looking at that. And so that will be probably another year long before that publication is finished, but that should help small community airports like ours tell that story better about that lower carbon footprint. In essence, instead of having 80 people drive to PDX to take a flight out and connect, if you stay local and use your local airport and connect, say in Seattle, you are reducing that greenhouse gas emission.
Yeah, in my former job, I used to actually do that kind of analysis, and I think that would be an easy thing to do and not wait a whole year to get that analysis. I think that's something that could be done relatively quickly, and I would commend that you should look at that, as well as the gas station is another good example. If we're taking cars and actually driving them to go get filled up and then bringing them back instead of filling them up there, we have to take into consideration that whole package. My nephew actually just graduated PhD from San Diego in aeronautical engineering, and he is working for an automated electric flying taxi company, which is just around the corner, by the way. And so have you thought about how that integrates into this design and how electrification of this, as well as alternative fuels. I know Alaska's been doing that for a long time, doing alternative fuels and how that infrastructure is different, and whether or not this expansion takes all of that new sustainability into consideration.
Yes, so, this study is a high level study, but we did add these components in because we know it's coming and we want to be able to accommodate that. And so when we took a look, and it is, in the body of the study, you can see where we've addressed that. We're looking at potentially repurposing B gates for electric vertical and takeoff aircraft, right? And then you would need to consider the electric charging in that area. And then there's, the big debate of, is the electric charging static, or does it come on batteries that are hot swap, right? Or do you take the aircraft to a different location to charge? So all kinds of different aspects. But in general, we looked at where might we be able to accommodate eVTOL aircraft. The current fuel farm has room to expand now that it's a new farm, and potentially could sustain alternative fuels. So we are looking at future looking whenever we are making a planning study like this, to make sure that even if it doesn't happen within this 20-year span of our current development plan, that potentially in the next 40 years, we would be ready, just because we've thought about these things ahead of time.
Yeah, there's a project potentially in Klamath Falls area that actually takes biomass and creates it into jet fuel that is on the drawing boards. And regard to solar, there's a state law 1.5% for green energy technologies for public projects over 5 million. This qualifies. Is this because it's an airport? Does that still qualify?
No, but it's certainly something that we would want to do. In fact,
I could volunteer to do it.
yes, of course.
I think that would be.
We ran a really a very small scale experiment with a solar panel to charge a gate arm on one of our parking areas a few years back. And it worked great until cloudy day and about the middle of the night would stop working. But I realized that technology has come a long way since then. So we are doing another project with the car rental facility where we'll be installing solar panels on that facility, hoping to be able to generate enough electricity to run that facility. And hopefully we'll see some success there. But definitely any of the projects moving forward, is we would be looking at that.
And of the over $200 million, zero general fund dollars, correct?
Zero general fund dollars.
Right,
We're an
so
enterprise fund,
it's all-
no operating, no capital. So when we start talking about, how do we fund something like this, it would typically be a bond, and ours would be a passenger facility charge-based bond and airport revenues, no general fund dollars.
Right, so the revenues of the new expansion would pay for the capital expansion. Yeah, and just as a, I hope in the new, having used a lot of airports, that there is electric outlets at every seat in the waiting area and free Wi-Fi. Please make that happen.
We do have free Wi-Fi. We're working on.
I know we have free Wi-Fi.
charging.
Great. But overall, we can increase the capacity of the airport, increase air flights, and lower greenhouse gas emissions, because all that's coming. So I don't see this as a fossil fuel project. I see this as an alternative fuel project that's going to be incorporated into all of this.
Thank you. Randy?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Catherine and company, very much for the presentation. I thought the AIS was excellent, a lot of detail. And I very much appreciate our airport. My family and I use it all the time. And although we are starting to notice that Concourse A is getting a little more crowded. And so I think, I feel like we're already behind the curve a little bit, but I look forward to seeing how we progress this. Funding was one of the things I was going to ask about. I'm sure there's probably some FAA grants as well that are part of this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the price tag is, I felt like we needed to put a big sticker shock, graphic across that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the volatility and construction costs right now, and supply chain issues. It's when they were developing that part. But, the bottom line, it is a huge investment in our community, in our regional community. So yes, it would be a bond process that we would need to work with city finance to figure all of that out with that bond council. And we of course, have our entitlement grants from the FAA annually. Those have been doubled for the next 5 years, so that's great. And then we actually did very well through the special grants through the pandemic, the CARES, the CRISA, and the ARPA. So those all were applied basically in a way that could be rolled directly into our capital fund. And then there are additional grant availability right now that are competitive. Some are specific to terminals, some are specific to terminal planning. And so we do hope to draw upon those. Those are another 5-year run of different grant opportunities. And so that is something we would definitely be looking at. And potentially we would look at other grant sources as well. You know, we have another project on the field right now, which is expanding our air cargo apron, and that was made available through a Connect Oregon grant. So always looking at different opportunities like that, not just FAA grants.
Great, thank you. And as far as phase in, I'd be interested as this progresses to see what that might look like. I think it's really hard to do the big bang all at once, but if we can start working towards a shared goal, I think that would be helpful. I also want to mention that not only is this important to our community, but it's very important what you're doing at the airport for our economic development efforts. Businesses want to know how they're going to get people in and out, especially for meetings. I like to see that there were some conference rooms that would be a part of this that I'm guessing would be available for rent or use for industry that wants to come in and just hold a meeting at the airport and go back out. I know that more of that's being done virtually these days, but there's still benefit in having face-to-face. And I've heard that from some of our businesses as well. So that's important. As far as alternative fuels, I like the work that you did on this. I'm not going to belabor this a lot because I think Councilor Zelenka and the mayor raised that issue already. One I did want to add that I was very interested in reading about lately was the test flight over Qatar, where they used a hydrogen cell on an A380 on one engine and regular jet fuel on the other. It's a safety measure, and it seemed like the test worked pretty well. And it sounds like you can even get further range with the hydrogen cells than you can with Jet A. So that might be an interesting proposition to look at. And the off-gassing is just water vapor.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems to be my attitude as we move forward on this and other issues in the city is we don't rule out anything until we know, when you get to a new land, don't burn the ships until you know you can survive there. But we need to be looking at all these alternatives in my mind. But again, huge fan of the airport. As you know, my career was in the fire service, but if I were to work anywhere else in the city, it would have been at the airport. I found that always very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
You vying from the metaphor.
That's a good one. Thanks, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. Congrats on being Airport of the Year in 2020. Could you touch on that a bit? I know, Alan, you referenced some of the accolades that you've received over the years. If you could briefly touch about Airport of the Year, and then I was reading on Kona Equity. Some pieces about revenue, and I want to talk about revenue growth, but I'd love to hear what earned the Airport of the Year in 2020.
Sure. So the Airport of the Year was awarded to us by the Transportation Security Administration as for the top small hub airport across the country in 2020. And it really had to do with our security program. Our security manager, Tammy Harchie, has done an excellent job. She's considered an expert in her field, and she has created programs that are now used as an example for other airports across the country. And so that was a recognition of her efforts and really our whole team efforts in our security at the airport. We take things very seriously there.
Kudos to your security team. I'm assuming it's a little like the Academy Awards. You won it in 2020, but it was for 2019 work because there really wasn't much happening.
Probably, yes.
So Kona Equity indicates $84 million a year in revenue, 1,290 employees at the airport. And yet, according to Kona Equity, revenue growth is less than the industry average, and the number of employees apparently is not growing as fast as the industry average. What strategies or tactics have you embraced or employed to address revenue growth and the number of employees matching industry, not standards, industry average?
Mm-hmm. So I guess there are a lot of different employee groups at the airport. So at the airport, city employees, we are 56. So we actually are pretty lean and mean for an operation of our size, especially one with the growth trajectory that we have been on. So when you're referencing the 1,800 or so,
Well, 1,290 according to Kona Equity.
yeah, and I believe that probably came from the state aviation plan, which was taking a look at the economic impact of airports in each community. And so that's everybody that has a job on the airfield. So that's airline workers, the ground handlers, the concessionaires, the car rental workers, people who operate businesses out of hangars and their employees. So that's the total picture of the people that work there. What I have direct control under mostly is the 56 employees that I have working for the city of Eugene. And then somewhat the contracting of different work that is done for us at the airport as well. But I don't control the airlines or the ground handlers. Those are kind of the most number of employees are the ones that I definitely don't control or influence.
I flew recently and noticed at the baggage claim that there were, I think it was Willamette and Eugene Parks and Recreation advertisements played over and over. So I saw an opportunity for increasing revenue by utilizing we tend to wait a little while to get our bags in Eugene. and so utilizing that advertising space. I also want to recognize that there's some transportation, this isn't your lane, but I'll bring it up anyway. There's some transportation hiccups from our airport into our community. Unlike other airports of this size where there's ongoing, I think there's opportunities for improved transportation, public transportation from our airport. Moreover, the nearest hotels that I'm aware of are Oakway Center or West 11th. Could you touch on the partnership opportunities with our restaurant and lodging industry to explore accommodating passengers and hotels around the airport?
Yeah, I absolutely am in agreement with you. So we, it's been a rough run for businesses at the airport. Our shuttle service failed during that time. We put an RFP out a couple of times with no takers. We're now into direct negotiations just with some key companies trying to at least get students from OSU and U of O back and forth to the airport. But yes, you're right. That is a business opportunity for someone, and we're trying to reestablish that. Public bus service is another one that we would really like to see a regular route. We did a pilot project. Gosh, it's probably been 8 years ago now. And the tricky part there is when airline employees need to go to work, the buses aren't running, and so it just was a disconnect, to be able to, that's the main thing, is to be able to get employees back and forth. Mostly we found passengers didn't really want to do that, at least not yet. And then as far as hotel, we put a hotel RFP out 3 times now, no takers, really frustrating because we would really very much like to have a hotel. We have a designated site for it and everything. So, we may be able to start trying to work directly with a hotel developer to do that. But, we've tried. So another good business opportunity that no takers on yet.
My final 30 seconds, Mayor, I want to highlight, I think it was on slide, it's like a picture from DIA. Slide 8, page 4, the open outdoor area.
Mm-hmm.
When I go to Denver, that's one of the first things I find, and just get a little fresh air. And I noticed that there's a place for a 4-legged friend there as well. Not that I've traveled with my Great Dane, nor would I, that would be bonkers. But I'm eager to see an outdoor area at the Eugene.
I am too. And, Salt Lake City has one in a couple areas. And I think it would be, there's this, the one I go to is at the Delta Lounge in Salt Lake, but I like one that everyone could enjoy. So that would be our focus.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay and then Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. This is so exciting. I frequently travel out of the Eugene Airport and definitely see the need for expansion. My question is around the charter terminal, and if you could explain more about kind of the need for that, the projected volume for that terminal, and kind of, I guess, more about why a separation for ticketing and that is would be necessary.
So right now, so both the universities run charters for multiple teams. And there's also other charters. There are gambling junkets and different things like that, and actually smaller direct charters that operate. Right now, they're operating out of the air cargo building. That is not where they should be operating. That's a cargo facility. It's not a charter facility, but it's the best we could do in the time being. And so it's a need that we've had for quite some time. And so the way that the conceptual design is so that we can have a charter facility, but the actual gate where boarding and deboarding happens can be a swing gate. So it can be used by any airline. And then when it's a charter, pull the gate over, and they can use the charter facility down below, come up and use that facility or use that gate directly. The other thing it does, it provides a backup plan for an international flight diversion, which, yep, we have a plan for that right now. We do not ever want to try that plan because it's also at the cargo building. So this would allow for a more appropriate facility to have as an international diversion.
That's really interesting. Thank you for explaining more of that for me. I think it's important for our professional, well, not professional, but our UVO DUCS team to have kind of a nice space to come in and out of. But I wanted to just ask about kind of that return on investment, but that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
All right, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you. So I was sitting here making an assumption, and I thought I should probably ask just to make sure. But it sounds like what you're saying is that we've kind of reached our capacity for growth as we are now, so that this will give us an opportunity to grow those new revenues if we have opportunities to expand our businesses. And then in going along that thinking, would we then make that some of those, like the hotel and shuttle services and bus routes, that all might become more of a realistic opportunity when we're able to, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I would just clarify a little bit on that. We've basically shoehorned, all of these new airlines and passengers into our terminal, into a terminal that's not right-sized. And we carved out extra space when Southwest came in. All of that space has been gobbled up. And yet if we had another airline come in now, we'd have to figure it out, right? So, and we have, at the same time, our airline partners are saying, we really need you to build this thing. We want you to build this because they are gate constrained. They're having to really look closely at their schedules because they only have one gate to operate from. They can operate it at their gates, but they have to make sure another airline isn't there. And then it makes it really tricky if you have any flight delays. And so if the airlines are asking for this, that's not always what happens. Sometimes they are actually pushing back on expansions instead of encouraging expansions. So that says a lot, actually, that they want this expansion as well. And they're the ones that are going to be investing in this through their rates and charges, and the passenger facility charges run through the airlines as well.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say how impressed I was with all the information we got. I couldn't find something where I was like, oh, they didn't think about this. I mean, it feels like you really did such a comprehensive job of thinking about so many different things. And I really appreciated how, we've talked today, and it was in the report about thinking about the future, but also what I'm hearing is being a little conservative about that. Like there are all these possible opportunities, but we're not going to jump on one and just assume it's going to be the right thing. Like, we're not going to assume we're going to have different types of fuels. But we're going to continue doing our homework and watching those trends and being ready for it when it happens, right? And I think that's a really smart move. So, and I am also very excited about this. I think it'll be a lot more enjoyable to use the airport in the future. I think we'll all look forward to that.
Thank you. And Alan, you have a second round?
Yeah, I know you guys take security very seriously. And you do a good job in the new facilities and the way that we get in and out of the airport, especially the checks are much better. But while I was, just went to Washington DC a week ago, and I'm standing there waiting for my baggage to go through the thing, and there are pictures of pistols that have gone through checked baggage in Eugene's airport. And I know there's some dumb people that think maybe I can bring a weapon onto a plane and check baggage, but what's going on? And then there was an article in the paper that 6,000 weapons have been confiscated at airports. What's going on there?
Well, and this is really a realm of the TSA, because we don't have
Yeah, we're
screening
not in
function,
charge of
but,
TSA, right?
but I guess I would say they're doing their job, right?
Yeah.
Clearly, if they're finding those, there is a way to carry in your checked bag, but you have to declare, and there's a bunch of rules around that. So I believe what they were showing was the carry-on bags,
Yes,
what they're
right.
discovering in carry-on bags. And so, I mean, they're doing their job. They do a lot of outreach to remind people,
What are
but
people thinking?
well, maybe they're not thinking.
Oh, yeah, that was the operative word there. I know you take security. When Mike and I first came on council, we got a tour of the airport, and it was much different then, but we got to go up into the tower and with the air traffic controllers. They wouldn't let me land a plane, but it was actually really informative. Still bitter about that, but. Oh.
Thank you. Randy, one more? comment?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. One comment and then a question. As we go forward with this, if we could get information about projected O&M costs too, so we understand the ongoing, when you add footprint, obviously you add costs. I'm supportive of adding footprint. We need it, but it's nice to know that from a fiscal responsibility standpoint. And then the last piece, I read some references to air freight, and you reminded me when you brought that up in air cargo. How is our current utilization? Are we at capacity? Do we have capacity? What do we have with our current?
We have capacity in our current facility, although I believe that's being taken. Okay, and now it's gone. So, but one of the reasons we're, expanding the taxiways there is so that we could accommodate a larger cargo carrier, along with currently the charter flights that they would like to bring larger charter flights that they cannot bring onto that apron right now. So that was the main reason to do that project, is to make sure that we could accommodate larger cargo aircraft that wanted to come and potentially build a facility there as well.
Councilor Evans and I have been working in West Eugene on with some potential people coming in, businesses. And one of the things we've pushed is, hey, we've got an airport with a 10,000-foot runway and plus rail and good ground transportation next.
8,009 feet.
8,009 feet. Okay. I like to round up.
To 10.
Still, you can land just about anything on that runway. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. One more quick comment?
Yeah, in my previous life as an LCC board member, I got a chance to check out the Aviation Academy at the airport and fly. And I'm not, I have an issue with it. So I was in one of those planes, shot a video, and loved I just loved and embraced the opportunity to be with those students. How does this, if at all, affect the Aviation Academy at the airport, and what's the relationship like long term for the health of that program? And then piggybacking off Alan's observation about his tour back in the day, I'd love to take a tour of the facility.
Yeah, please come out. I welcome all of you to come out. We would love to have you, because we've had a lot of change since a couple of you have been out before. The Lane Aviation Academy is wonderful. They have both a flight school and a mechanic school. There's a pilot shortage right now. There's a mechanic shortage. Those are critical programs, and I'm really happy to have them on our field. This project is not going to impact them, but I will tell you, there's a special provision where you can do $1 a year lease, and that's what they're under right now. It's accredited aviation schools, air and space museums, and Civil Air Patrol. So all of those entities are on a $1 a year lease to support those programs, because they in turn support the airport in our community. So want them to stick around a long time. This won't impact them, but we really encourage them to keep going with their program. I understand they've really improved their program and have expanded it in the recent years. So since the pandemic has been ending, and hopefully that will continue because there's definitely a demand for those aviation jobs.
Okay,
They get a DNA sample to go.
thank you so much. It's clear we could continue talking, but we do have another item on the agenda. So thank you very much. Wonderful work. It's very, very exciting, and we look forward to hearing more. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's for the
Yeah,
award.
yeah.
It's for the award.
I realized that's in forum, but I couldn't.
No, good call.
We have special.
Outdoor space at Denver International at 18 degrees will wake you up.
Yeah, there you go. My son was there this morning, said it was 14 degrees.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, welcome. I'm just giving you a chance to get your technology
Thank
sorted
you.
out.
I need it. I definitely need all the time I can get on that front.
Okay.
Oh, did it go?
Okay.
Needed that.
All right. So our second agenda item is a presentation by our independent police auditor, Leah Pitcher, to talk about the civilian oversight. And I will just turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Hi, it's good to see you again. I don't think I was actually when I was here last, but I was here in May, just as a quick reminder. I was here last May actually with Catherine, and we gave a presentation on the history and the sort of structure of the current police oversight system. At the end of that, you all asked me to come back with my recommendations for potential improvements to the system. So that is what I'm here with today. I want to just start out with pointing out that these are my recommendations from me and my independent little office, right? So they haven't been vetted by city attorney, city manager, police chief, the union. These are my ideas. So when I'm going through all of these, I just want you to keep that in mind. These are from me. One of the many avenues available to you is to ask for opinions from other folks as well, right? So just wanted to point that out. I also wanted to start by highlighting the things that I find to be key components of a successful oversight system. I get contacted by a whole lot of jurisdictions with questions about our model, how to set up a model like ours in their communities. And the three things that I always stress are our independence, that I report directly to you is of enormous value, I think, both in the eyes of the community and also in just how I operate. Also our access. I think our access to information is pretty astounding. I can ask for body worn video, in-car video, police reports, radio traffic. I can receive all of that in a really responsive, timely manner, which allows me to be more accurate in how I do my work, be more thorough, and also just have more legitimacy. So hugely important. And then finally, our funding protection, that we are guaranteed sufficient funds to perform our duties under the charter and under the city code is hugely beneficial. In other jurisdictions, you can see that this can sometimes be an issue, right? Where there's like a financial retaliation for an unpopular thing. And that's not something I have to fear at all. Nor would I, because we have a good working relationship, but those three things are really helpful. And I always highlight them as really prescient on the part of the folks who were crafting these ordinances to create our system. So starting there, I ended up sort of highlighting 4 areas for potential growth of our system. And a really high level, none of these are charter implications, right? I think the structure of our system, the model of our system is really sound. I've been working in the system for 13 years and it's been really valuable and really interesting. And also just, I think the soundness of the model is very clear. We'll just dive right in. The first one would be potentially expansion of the auditing function. What do I mean by that? Right now, our focus is on complaints. We are fairly reactive, right? We are allowed under the code to monitor how complaints are handled. We classify how they're handled. We can report on trends. We can report on disciplinary trends, and we can make recommendations on training based on what we see in complaints. So that's all sort of what I see as sort of back end. So when I talk about expanding this function, the vision for growth that I see is potentially expanding an auditing function. So a reporting on, making recommendations, sort of general function to the front end, the hiring, the training, promotional processes. I want to stress that this is not at all me wanting to interfere in the city manager's authority to hire, fire, and promote, right? That is hers. I don't want that. This is more just having a general overview and being able to report on trends and make recommendations in a general way on these functions of the police department. I bring this up because it's been something that's come up over my time in this office. It also aligns with some of the concerns and recommendations from the ad hoc committee as far as having civilian input into these decisions. I think it's interesting to think about as far as, especially with the level of access and the level of data that we have access to, you know, how can I look at that and look at measures of success? Can we make a metric that measures problem solving ability, right? How can we look at this in an interesting way that really brings community values into hiring, training, and promotion at the police department, right? I have a quote. This is, so one of the changes that I'll talk about in a minute is the police department changed their policy to track a lot of shows of force, right? So we have this amazing amount of data on how many times, you know, tasers are shown rather than deployed, and guns and all of those things. And so I was reading, there was an article in the Washington Post this week about an increase in deadly encounters, in police deadly encounters. And the criminologist said, we need a better understanding of when police shoot and injure people, but more so when police avoid shooting someone. And that stood out to me because we have that, like we have this amazing level of data. And so this is sort of, when I talk about expanding into this function, it's looking into that data, expanding how we report on it, making recommendations on how those things work. And I should say, sorry, I meant to say this at the beginning. Every time I've gone through this, it's taken more time than I wanted. So I'm going to talk as fast as I can and as clearly as I can. And if I need to come back for a second work session so we can have a more robust discussion, I am happy to do that. So just to be clear. So impact. The impact that I see is there would be more transparency around hiring and promotion and training. We could have civilian input into these areas from our office without interfering with that vital city manager executive function. Can have more reporting, make recommendations, and build community trust that community values are reflected in these processes. Authority. So this is where I have my lawyer hat on, but I am not your city attorney. So she would need time to look at these. But in my opinion, I look at the charter, and the charter says that the auditor can prepare reports on complaint trends and police practices in general, right? So in my reading of that, this would be a expansion of reporting on police practices in general, right? The code 2.454 1F sets out that the auditor will have a quality assurance function with the goal of identifying systemic changes that will improve police services. It then sets out 3 examples. This is not any of those 3 examples, right? This is a new thing. But my vision of it is that it sort of slots right into that QA function. Past implementation, you know, in my AIS, I had a lot of various and ors, right? You could do this and or. And I think as I kept thinking about it, all of these are, I want to have a conversation and hear how you feel about all of these things. And if these, and want you to solicit opinions from other folks. And then if council determines that these are paths that they want me to help us embark on as a city, then I would work with staff and come back to you with those. So this is one of those where if this is something that council is interested in, there's a lot of ways forward, and I don't necessarily see any of them requiring a code change. But again, you should get opinions from other folks on that. Yeah, so this is, I think, having council input and direction and prioritization around all of these is what I'm hoping we can talk about today. And then challenges to this one would need to be crafted carefully, so we're not impinging on city manager authority under the charter. And then also, of course, almost all of these, I think, are potential changes in working conditions that would require bargaining and negotiations with the union. I should also be clear, while I have I've let other stakeholders know where my thinking is on all of these. So none of these would be a surprise, right? Chief Skinner has seen these, Sarah has, Catherine has, and the union has. Everyone, I'm really open about my thinking, and they're all coming from me. So next, improving administrative investigative response to use of deadly force. This is a tough one. Our office has been sort of talking about this for a long time. So currently, the response to a deadly force incident is an interagency investigative team. That's created by state law and a county plan. And they do that criminal investigation, and then there's an administrative investigation that follows. The legislation that created the interagency, it's IDFIT, but the Interagency Deadly Force Investigation Team was crafted at the same time as the code was drafted to create our office. So they just don't really integrate all that smoothly together. So currently what happens is there's this interagency investigation, and then at the close of that goes to EPD, and we review it, and IA reviews it. We look for policy violations, and we move forward on that administrative side. But it's definitely not efficient or expedient. And then the focus of the IDFIT investigation is whether or not this was a criminal act, right? Whereas my job and my goal, as I see it, is to provide a full investigation into what happened, which is a fundamentally different question. So this is one of those things where we have different purposes, and the integration could be a lot better, I think. I do want to really highlight that so last year there was a House bill that was passed that changed the objective of IDFIT investigations. And so now they are supposed to include whether the involved officer's use of deadly force was objectively reasonable under the circumstances. And interesting, this is the new part, whether there was a reasonable opportunity prior to the use of deadly physical force for the involved officer to consider alternatives to the use of force or give a warning. So that's going to be, hopefully, produce a much more expansive IDFIT investigation. I have yet to see one of the IDFIT investigations produced under the new standards. So this is one of those areas where, and I'll talk about this in the challenges, but the landscape is sort of constantly changing. I should be seeing one of these soon, so I'll be able to report back on how that looks and if it is more expansive and answers more of the questions. But I just didn't want to forget that. So the vision for growth is it's an investigative process that would complement the IDFIT and produce a thorough, balanced administrative investigation. It would include an efficient, prompt evaluation of the IDFIT investigation, quick and fair identification of potential policy violations, quick and fair investigation into those issues, and then a timely adjudication. Right now, that's not where we are, right? The administrative investigation follows after this criminal investigation. There's a use of force board. It's just a little, it's not something we run into all that often, but I think that we can do it better than we are doing right now. Impact. Obviously, the use of deadly force, well, I don't know if it's obvious, but sorry, I shouldn't say that, but this is one of the most, if not the most serious issue that we face in oversight of police, and the community deserves a thorough and complete accounting into any use of deadly force. And I want to be able to provide that. Authority. The code requires that the auditor receive timely notification of critical incidents, including officer-involved shootings. So it seems that the intent was there that the auditor would be able to respond and to the same extent that internal affairs investigators can, that we respond, and we do. It's really just that the way deadly force is investigated as soon as this ordinance was enacted, that part changed. So sorry, this is a little bit in the weeds and I'm doing my best to keep it as high level as I can. But path to implementation, I don't see, there's no required code changes that are immediately apparent to me. This is one of those areas where, especially with some council direction, I think it would help for me to work with city staff to craft or negotiate a process that fills the gaps and produces a product that's a little more thorough. Challenges. Landscape here changes rapidly. There was the bill passed last year. There are several bills in the legislature, I think this session, that are, and one of them would actually change it so deadly force is investigated by a statewide body, right? So this is one of those areas where things can change a lot. And it's just extraordinarily complex. It's criminal law, it's administrative law, constitutional law, employment law, all of the laws and all of the emotions. I mean, I think this is, uses of deadly force are difficult for the involved officer, difficult for the community. And I think being able to have thoughtful conversations around those, there's a lot of high emotion can just be tricky. But I think that we can all focus on the need to have a solid, thorough, fair investigation that we can produce for and talk to the community about. This would be the most specific of the bunch, evolving the auditor's role on use of force review boards. So currently, the code provides that the auditor will participate on use of force review boards. That includes deadly force review boards. And then under the protocols and EPD policy, the auditor is a non-voting member. So currently what happens is the board chair prepares a memo for the chief that sort of sums up the conversation, has an adjudication recommendation from the board as a group. And then what our office has done is we just write our own memo. So we can ensure that our point of view is represented in the file. The vision for growth would be that we could change from being a participant on that board to a voting member. The impact to me is that integrating the auditor into voting would change how our voice is heard in that room. I think if you're all sitting at a table and you know that someone at that table isn't going to be part of the vote at the end, it can be hard to give that person a lot of weight, and that's understandable. And then I also think that having our opinion reflected in that official record, instead of having to do a separate memo to ensure that our point of view is heard, could streamline the process and also just make it a little more efficient and hopefully more timely for everybody who's involved. Authority. So code requires that we participate. It's policy and protocols that shift the auditor from a participant to a non-voting member. So council could definitely solicit opinions, especially from that very smart person right there, about what would be required to make this change happen if this is something that council would want to go forward with. Potentially a policy change would, I mean, I'm not saying we wouldn't participate in use of force boards, right? I'm just saying we would participate as a voting member instead. So there's that. Challenges. This would be a change in working condition. I'm sure the union would want to bargain it. I can also, that's the main challenge that I see. I move forward. And then this is the more tough one. So as I've been thinking over the last several months about the issues that I see in oversight and what I've run into and issues that were raised by the ad hoc committee, a lot of them come back to items that are in the oversight protocols. The oversight protocols were negotiated in 2007. So they predate even the most recent version of the ordinance, which was the changes to it were enacted in 2009. So I started looking through the protocols and have a few areas that I think would be good to focus on if we open up the protocols for renegotiation. Some just to reflect what we actually do as far as current practice, but then some also are evolutions in and of themselves. So number one, our mediation program. The code allows for the auditor to identify complaints that would be good for mediation. And then if the reporting party and the officer agree, we refer them to a mediator. And then mediation takes the place of investigation, adjudication, and discipline. The feedback we've gotten from people who do it is that it's an amazing process. It's also just not super efficient or timely. So it began to get used less and less, which is unfortunate because I think it's a really fantastic program. So I was looking through, and there are mediation protocols as well that were negotiated in 2007. So as I look through, what I would love to do would be to, if we're looking at the protocols, renegotiate some of these so we have an updated list of service providers, or at least an updated manner in which we select service providers. Potentially look at how we could expand the use or efficiency, have deadlines in these mediation protocols. And the impact is that I do think this is a potentially really constructive way to resolve complaints. I think if you can have a conversation with folks instead of having a real accusatory, you did this, no, I didn't do this, that you can actually come to a better understanding and have changed behavior and improved services. So this would be one of those things that the code already requires, the code already allows a mediation program. I don't see any need to change any of the code provisions. This is really just something that would be negotiated with city staff and the union and our office. And then kind of all of these next ones are going to be that kind of thing. So the next item is disagreement and adjudication. This has been something that's come up since the PAORC meetings. It's always been a thing. So, and I want to be clear, this is adjudication, not discipline. So adjudication is whether or not the behavior violated policy. Discipline is what happens if the behavior violated policy. So adjudication only. Currently, we make a recommendation to the chief. The chain of command makes a recommendation to the chief, and the chief is the adjudicator. The question always comes up, but what if there's a disagreement? And we've tried a lot of different ways to resolve that. We've had, we'll write a memo or we'll, all these other ways to do it. The thing that we've landed on right now, I think is actually pretty amazing. And I really want to give a lot of credit to Chief Skinner. He volunteered to come to CRB meetings when they're reviewing a case where there's a disagreement. And, it's not an interrogation, it's not a tribunal, but he's there and he can answer questions and just have a conversation. And it actually happened last month in person. It was pretty fantastic. And so I'm excited that we've hit on something that feels like a really good solution. Why I'm bringing it up here is because I can see the benefit in codifying or recording that. Just because, you're not always going to have him in his position. You're not always going to have me in my position. And so that would both ensure that there is a process there for when there's a disagreement, and also provide that clarity to the community, right? Because right now, if the community looks at the same papers I gave you, they'll always have the question, what happens? And so I like the idea of having a clear answer for folks. I think that will build community confidence and understanding of our system and help us move forward. Classification category expansion. I think I called this flexibility in the AIS, but as I was working through it, this makes more sense to me. So forgive me for that. But this is currently the protocols have 5 categories for how I can classify a complaint. You would think that might be enough. It's somehow not. It doesn't include incident reviews, which is something we added in 2018, I believe. So basically there's one aspect where it doesn't reflect our current practice. Incident reviews are sort of a middle ground where we can do a whole lot of investigation, everything except to speaking with the involved officer to make sure we have all of the details before we make an accurate classification. So on one hand, my area for growth is I would like to update this so it actually reflects how we do practice. And then two is if we're opening this up, I would love to explore the potential of differentiating further. I think what I've seen is, and it's hard to tell at the beginning, but what I've seen is sometimes there are allegations of misconduct where from the outset, you know, you need to do an investigation and get to the bottom of it, right? You just do. And sometimes there are ones where you see them and it maybe seems more like a mistake. And I catch myself wondering, and I have had countless conversations with the union and with Chief Skinner about how can we potentially create an avenue for a conversation instead of this really antagonistic interview investigation process when it's appropriate, right? And so this is one of those where if we have some direction to look at these protocols and see where we can go, that's an avenue I would like to look at. Again, I think we could have clear expectations around, you know, what is this investigation going to look like? What are the timelines going to be? And it could result in improved understanding and service, police service, and then changed behavior. I promise I'm trying to go fast. Good cause, timeliness limits. So I'll mention this. The ad hoc committee also talked about changing the timeliness limits for complaints. The code currently says that allegations of serious misconduct must be received within 6 months. Minor misconduct must be received within 60 days. So any change to those timelines would require a code change. However, both of those have a good cause exception, which has historically been interpreted very, very narrowly. I think Mark once told me if they're in a coma. So as I've looked through these, you know, I looked through all of the cases that we've dismissed for timeliness, which there aren't that many, but as I look through them, I think my recommendation is to instead look at how good cause is interpreted, because I think that actually covers the bases of that feel less fair, right? So just having more flexibility in good cause can allow us to do fact finding, even if there's if there's a labor concern or a issue where discipline can't happen because of a labor or an employment issue. I think getting to the bottom of the fact of the matter is still important and can still help with community trust in the mission of our office. So this would be one where we don't have to update the code or change the code, but having an understanding that good cause is going to be a little more flexible than it has been for the last 13 years could help us move forward. Public comment at CRB, this is another one that aligns with concerns brought by the ad hoc committee. Currently, the protocols say that CRB can't have public comment on the case that's being reviewed at that night's CRB meeting. So the concern was that public comment would influence how the CRB is looking at the case. In practice, it can be excruciating because you have family members and folks coming in to talk about a use of force or a use of deadly force against their family member, and they're not allowed to speak about it at the meeting where we're reviewing that case. So it's been hard for CRB members, it's been hard for community members. And one thing I've discussed with CRB leadership is, well, what if we have public comment after the case review? They are completely open to that. The only issue is that we've agreed to protocols that say we won't do that, right? So I would love to look into the protocols, see if we can all agree on a process that allows for public comment on the case, at the case. And then investigation timelines. This is one where, again, this is just a time thing where we negotiated the protocols in 2007. We didn't have body-worn camera. We didn't have in-car video. Our preliminary investigative steps take a lot more time than they used to. We're a lot more thorough and we try to be very, very accurate. And then also accordingly, the investigative process can sometimes take longer and the adjudication process can sometimes take longer because we have a longer chain of command. So you have sergeants, lieutenants, chiefs, assistant chief, everybody's weighing in on these things. And so as I was talking to Chief Skinner about, hey, if I'm going to make recommendations on our process, what do you think? And he's like, well, our timelines don't match. And so this is one of those where I think it would make sense if we're looking at the protocols to look at what timelines would actually make sense and be more accurate for folks. So there's a fair expectation of timeliness on this process, because I think it's draining for folks to keep getting extensions and not really know when it's going to end, right? And that's not fair for anyone. Additional considerations. So discipline comes up frequently. And so I wanted to address it, but I didn't find myself in a position where I could necessarily make a recommendation on a model, right? So that's why it's at the end. So this is the discipline part. So this is if someone has had a behavior that's outside of policy, what does that look like? So this has come up with ad hoc committee. This has come up with PAYORK. This is, come up constantly sort of over time. How do we have any civilian input into discipline? Currently, the Employee Resource Center assists with disciplinary recommendations. They would be far more qualified to speak to the details of how that works than I am. And then the chief is the determiner of discipline. I want to be clear that there's no way I don't see any situation where I would come to this group and say, I want to be a decider of discipline. That is a charter change. That's a huge change for me, and that's not where I'm going. But there are a lot of models for civilian input into discipline if that's something this body wants us to do research and come back with. One could be a disciplinary board with various folks on it. One could be where the auditor makes a recommendation similar to what I do with an adjudication right now. There's a lot of potential ways forward, but it's a really, really just thick area of law. And there's charter implications. Oregon is very deferential to arbitrators, labor concerns. There's just a whole lot here. So if this is an area that council would be interested in saying, let's explore how the auditor's role could expand in this area, I think that would be something where we'd have to work a lot with city staff and city attorney and come back with a more clear recommendation. But at this time, I wasn't able to, or I don't think it's prudent to come to you with a clear recommendation on a model for my input. Okay, and then I've mentioned a little bit some of the recommendations from the ad hoc committee. So I wanted to do a quick update on progress on some fronts. And so just quickly, since the last time you all were updated on those recommendations, EPD has amended 4 policies with input from the Police Commission. Those ones listed there. Of note, the force response reporting, they now track, like I was saying, shows of force. So shows of canine, taser, guns, all those things. Personnel complaints has been amended to detail out duty to report misconduct, and that's in compliance with the state law change as well. Body-worn cameras have made it to most everyone. SWAT is still not equipped with body-worn cameras. And then there were recommendations around muting. Muting of body-worn cameras has been addressed through directives and training, but there's not a policy change on that yet. And I am reporting on that because I know it has happened, but it is not a civilian oversight issue. So just that's a FYI, I guess. And then I wanted to just touch on, I've come and I've made recommendations based on my own experience in this work, and where they align with some of the concerns raised by the ad hoc committee, I've tried to point that out. But I want to be clear about a few things. So the ad hoc committee made some specific recommendations that I just want to give you my opinion on now. And one is around extending timeliness limits. So I spoke to that earlier, but basically in my estimation, to extend timeliness limits would be a code change. And when I look through all of the cases that were affected by that, I think the good cause change actually meets that need, right? They also had recommendations around changing CRB membership to have no current or former EPD members, and to have a quorum be from marginalized groups. Both of those would require code changes as well. So right now, the code prohibits any current EPD employees or family members from being on the board. And then the code also says that appointments will not be on the basis of constituency or representation. So those are both very, very clear. The code also sets out a really clear selection process where the mayor and I create a selection subcommittee that then makes recommendations to you folks about who you want on that body. I think because I'm in a position of staff support for CRB, I will just say that I've had a great working experience with them. And I think that that's a determination for council and not necessarily for me. But my analysis is that those would require code changes. They also brought up a CRB stipend. Currently, no boards or commission members that I know of receive a stipend. So my assumption is that if that's something council is interested in, then council would direct city staff to look into for all boards and commissions, not just CRB. And that's something that, because we only staff CRB, maybe we're not the best folks to help you with that project. And then the additional evidence or subpoena power. This is an interesting one. CRB routinely evaluates the thoroughness of the investigations before them. And in the 13 years I've been doing this, I've never had a complaint from them that they didn't get information that was relevant to the investigation. In a community impact case, they are also allowed to send back investigations for more evidence gathering. And in cases that aren't community impact cases, I have that power to send an investigation back for more fact finding. So when I look at this, it substantially changes the role of a CRB from a reviewer to an investigator. It would likely require a charter change, in my opinion, and would be pretty difficult to do. So that it was really a wholesale change of our oversight system and not one that I can endorse. And then sort of similarly, there was a recommendation that CRB would have its own investigators. This would definitely change the system. In areas where I've seen this kind of model, you end up with double investigations that are often contradictory and decrease the legitimacy of both because you have one investigation from an IA team and one investigation from a civilian team, and they don't always match up. Currently, we work together to create one investigation that covers all of the bases. So again, this is one of those where I think our model works pretty well, and I can't endorse a wholesale change of it without a real need. And then finally, they addressed the issue of how to deal when adjudications disagree by proposing that authority go to the CRB. That would require a charter change, and it would take away authority from the city manager under the charter as well, and just would be in conflict with a principle that an executive of an organization should be able to sort of be in charge of the employees of their organization. So that's the other, though I like how we have handled that problem of disagreement rather than, trying to do a charter change. So when I look at the underlying problem there, what I proposed earlier is what I would recommend. And then finally, this is the last one. I wanted to highlight the changes that I've been working on over the last couple of years, just in response to what I've heard from the community and in response to what I've learned in this office. Number one, we're working on accessibility and responsiveness. We implemented a public portal, which is an online complaint submission software that's fantastic. People can submit anonymous complaints. We can get in touch with them again. That's not just in the ether. They can submit photos, videos, evidence, all the things. It's fantastic. We moved into a new office over the last few months. It's warm and welcoming and secure. It's a nice space for people to come and talk to us. We're improving our capacity for reporting. Annual report was improved with more graphics and more information. And then Lindsay's worked on making me more monthly report templates that are accessible and readable. We're also working on a website improvement that would include a dashboard that says, how many complaints we've had, what are open, what are not. And then I'm seeking an independent third-party DEI audit of our complaint process to make sure to look at all of our processes through a DEI lens and make sure that we're being as inclusive as we can possibly be. And I'm trying to find someone else to do that, so it's not just my opinion looking at our own processes. And that is where I will stop talking and take questions.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to turn to, this was really interesting, and I just want to compliment you because when I read the packet, I thought, oh my goodness, and I had lots of questions, and you have really framed it in a way that is understandable and clear, and I'm on much better footing than I was last night with the packet. So thank you for that. We are at time, and I know I have two counselors in the queue, and I do think this is going to really require an overflow work session. I'm sort of looking at counselors. I'm thinking you all have questions. There's a lot to digest here. So why don't I just suggest we'll go for an extra 10 minutes now, allow you to float a couple of questions, give a little feedback to the auditor so she has a sense of where you're going, and then we'll come back for another deeper conversation. Okay.
Thank you.
So I've got, okay.
I have a commitment.
Okay, so we'll that's another reason to assure you that we'll come back.
Me too.
And
Thank you. Sorry.
Wonderful.
I have 2 o'clock.
and you, yes, I think many of us have things to do. So I've got Alan and I've got Randy, Alan and Jennifer.
I'll be, and Matt. We'll get in by time.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Leah. I want to start by saying I support the auditor program. I support you in the position. I do have some concerns here. You helped address some of that. I was one of the counselors that voted yes to ask you to come back, including recommendations for the process. But I feel like in looking at the motions, and I'm glad we're coming back because I don't feel prepared to make any motions at this point until we have more. But my concern is I feel like we're moving from improving the process to expanding the process. And right now the auditor, kind of like the IRS, they don't prepare your tax returns, but they look at the appropriateness of your entries, make sure you've accounted for things, and they evaluate the filing. My concern with you moving into duties that are part of the process is it calls into question objectivity and neutrality. And it's not just whether you can maintain neutrality and objectivity, it's what the perception is by the public. And this program, I think, is important for the public to know that we have somebody that is watching the system, which is the job of the auditor. With that said, I do support facilitating, helping get mediation into the process whenever possible. I support conversations as an avenue and an option. It could help that piece of the process. I do understand. I went back and read Senate Bill 111 in 2000, was written in 2007, that really created what became IDFIT and the requirement to have interagency countywide systems for evaluation. And I think that's important so that the agency of involvement isn't the lead investigation authority. So anyway, there's a lot more I could say, but I would really like to learn more about how do we improve the current system?
Mm-hmm.
How do we keep you elevated as an auditor rather than drawing into the actual processes? And I'll just leave it at that now in the interest of time, Mayor, but I'm sure when we come back, I'll have more.
That
Thank
sounds
you.
good. Yeah, thank you. That's good. It's good thoughts for me to think about.
Okay, Alan and then Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, Leah, for your thoughtful analysis and for these recommendations. I've often said that the other communities are trying to get to where we start, especially when it comes to oversight. There are many communities that love to be where we are, just like right now. And we have numerous visits, as Leah's mentioned, from all around the country to learn how we do it, because this is the model. And for many, many people. That's not to say we can't improve the process. I think we have a very effective system that works well. It was created in 2007 and 2009. We did the PayWork, which I was on. I think Mike was on it too. But it's time to look at that and try to update it. This system doesn't need an overhaul. I think some of the ad hoc committee recommendations went too far. Having the CRB be the investigator, the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury is not where the system should be going. In fact, systems that do that don't work. Good example. There's numerous examples of where that doesn't work, where they, instead of all the ones that we do, they do one a year because they're bogged down with all the issues. I think that's a solution, looking for a problem that we don't have. I very much appreciate your opinion on these. I think what you say and how your recommendations weighs heavily in my thinking about this, as well as the ad hoc committees, as well as other counselors, as well as the general public's comments on all of this. I think your outline, your recommendations outline your opinion about what we should do with those recommendations. Are there any other recommendations from the ad hoc committee that you think we should be addressing, or is this, you looked at it all and said, this is what we should be focusing on, correct?
I looked at it all and these are the ones that stood out to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I the three areas that you have here, I think are fine. The fourth one's, going back and changing the protocols. We have the charter, which requires a vote of the people, ordinance, which requires the city council to act in public hearings, and then the protocols, which is actually should reflect the council's direction because she is our employee, but it doesn't need council action to have it effectuated. But it's not that simple. You still have to negotiate them with the chief and the union. So those are actually been hard fought over the years to get to where they are today. And that has not been easy. It's not been in the news lately. I used to kid Mark Gissner that on his evaluation that him not being in the paper every day was a hallmark of success. But the reason they work is because they are agreed to. And so having having that process work through. So I'm very supportive. I don't disagree with anything you said. So I'm happy to have you move forward and look at all those things and see where they can end up, and we'll talk about it some more at the next session.
Okay, Jennifer, and then Matt.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I just want to thank you for, you clearly were really thoughtful about the ad hoc committee and look beyond the recommendations to what are they really getting at here? If I can't do what they've recommended, if that doesn't make sense, what can I do to get at that same need? And I think that it's obviously very reflective, and I think it's just very nice to see it taken so seriously, right? I know that wasn't an easy process to go through, I'm sure, for you. I really appreciate the first item you talked about, being on the police commission. We talk about policy all the time, but policy is only as good as it's applied, right? Or followed. And so, just ensuring that we're sticking to our policies, I think is a great use of the auditor's office and that oversight capacity. I wouldn't say I have no concerns about any of these things, but I find them all to be thoughtful and worth taking to the next step to get some feedback from, like you said, other folks in the room, right? And so I really hope that we can move forward with that. And then you asked our opinion about the disciplinary section of all this. And I know that during the ad hoc, a lot of people had a lot of opinions in this sector. And I don't know that we came to any good conclusions, but I really appreciate you saying, here are some things that might work. And I do think it's worth our time. I don't know what everyone else thinks to at least take a look at those models and see, would this work for us? 2007 was a long time ago. I can't even remember what I was doing back then. So, it's taking a little bit of time to open this up and say, we have a good system. And like Ellen was saying, but we can't just stay here. We can't be stagnant because everyone else will catch up and do better. And then we're behind, right? We want to continue to be this leader that we've created. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. Leah, I want to commend you for the creative thinking and approach. And I also want to compliment you and your team on the police auditor website as outlined by the Office of Police Auditor Powers and Duties, Eugene City Code 2.454. You ask for commendations in addition to complaints. And I think that largely goes that's bearing the headline, because there are I'd love to hear when there are commendations, so we as a council could celebrate the good work that's done in the community as well. But I want to focus in on complaints.
Sure.
Complaints are mentioned 8 times in the aforementioned Eugene City Code. Complaints in regards to it's mentioned 7 times in the Eugene City Charter. I understand the office as being a complaint-driven office.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to the broad interpretation of the term police policies in general being coupled with hiring.
Okay, yeah.
And the reason is I haven't heard of any allegations of misconduct in regards to EPDs or any complaints revolving around EPD's hiring process. Are there any that I'm missing?
Yeah, yes and no. So we've definitely had complaints over the years where it's not that the hiring process wasn't followed. Definitely not that. It's more information coming to light during the hiring process that then would be a violation of policy.
Interesting.
Yes.
So I'm glad we're gonna have a second work session. You know, I want to prepare you with some of the questions that I would want addressed at that next
I
work
appreciate
session.
that.
If that works
Yeah.
for you and my colleagues. Is the police auditor process consistent and a model for national reform? I think we know the answer to that, but I'd like to hear you expand on that. What are we trying to fix through the recommendations that you've brought forth today? Do we have an oversight program that we're proud of and works? That's similar to that first question. Are we hunting for a solution to a problem that may or may not exist? And how do these proposals that you've made today make the chief's job either easier or more difficult? And then finally, yeah, and I asked the question about the hiring process piece.
Mhm.
I concur with Council President about the need to digest more before this council takes action
Absolutely.
or doesn't take action. But I applaud the creativity and I thank you for your time, for the time, Mayor, and I look forward to a larger conversation.
Thank you. Me too.
Okay, and Lindsay.
Yes, really quickly, just hi, nice
Hi,
to meet
You
you.
too.
Thank you for being here. I'm new to the material, and so it was a little overwhelming for me. I was trying to dive in as best as I could. So I think absolutely I agree that this just takes more time at this table. And I almost thought, wow, each of these areas is almost its own whole conversation.
Yeah.
And I got a little bit hung up on, you know, the idea of enacting the policies and practices rather than kind of drafting them, continuing the conversation further.
Yeah.
So I look forward to more conversations and to getting to know you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll close here and with the promise that we will come back so that we can dive more deeply now that you've given us this very thorough and I think extraordinarily helpful breakdown. We'll come back and then I think council will feel in a better position to make some direction for the next step. So
That feels better to me too.
okay,
Thank
that's
you.
excellent. All right, that's good to hear. So thank you very much for your work. Thank you all for extending the time. And with that, we're adjourned.